sanctions from the West are not the worst thing for the Russian economy. It is Putin. The West has imposed sanctions on Moscow since Russia launched war on Ukraine last February, but much of Russia's economic woes can be blamed on Vladimir Putin's mishandling of good and bad behavior. Before special military operations began, Russia was the 11th largest economy in the world, accounting for about 40% of the EU's oil production and a third of its oil field imports. A year and a half later, Putin turned Moscow into a corrupt state, cut itself off from the global financial system, banned its most profitable business, and arrested the brains of workers. Experts say the disaster occurred on its own. Yale researchers Jeffrey Sonnenfeld and Stephen Tien told Insider on Monday that Putin has completely lost the economic war and is now trying to control the situation, but it will soon get under his feet. It does an important job in the industry, Sonnenfeld said. The lion's share of the economy is controlled by the state, energy, and financial sectors, and Putin is using the money from the seed capital of these businesses to use the war chest as dough for himself. Business will never be the same. As Russia's economic power is just collapsing, many of its other major products, such as grain, wood, and iron, are sold cheaper than they were before the invasion. Lack of economic income forced Putin to pay taxes to businesses and individuals, which Yale researchers believe is part of his cannibalism in the economy. Tax complaints do nothing for the health of the country, but they allow it to pay the bills, Sonnenfeld said. Tien said Putin's policy mistakes were a threat after his initial call to invade Ukraine. He added that the Russian economy will never be the same as before. It is becoming increasingly clear that other countries can succeed without Russia as a trading partner. It's ruining Russian trade history, Tien said. The main export is goods, but no one wants to buy Russian goods anymore. According to the information Yale University shared with Insider, the Russian oil market has completely disappeared. The initial shock in February 2022 was quickly overcome thanks to regasification projects from Europe, and around 100 BCM of gas has been commissioned since then. It leads countries such as Germany, France, the Netherlands, and Italy in creating new warehouses and commissioning them in record time. China and India have been major buyers of cheap Russian goods since last year, while deep discounts and long shipping times significantly support the Russian economy, hindering product sales. If Putin were on the phone with us today, he wouldn't be able to point to a single policy or trade deal that is good for him, the Russian people, or the economy, Sonnenfeld said. The probability of a Soviet-style collapse. Volodymyr Lugovsky, professor of economics at Indiana University, told me that he expects major economic changes in the next 3 to 4 months. Many people still don't know how bad the situation in Russia can be, he said. Official government data shows that the country's economy was able to cover the costs of the war, but the background image of shops, airline purchases, and business thinking. Worse than the reported 2% decline in GDP, Lugovsky said. Sales of new cars, sales of new computers are down 40% to 60%. If you subtract the military from the data, it looks like production more than announced. The country's currency seems particularly at risk, with the ruble falling to a 15-month low after the Wagner Group's attempted coup in June. The rupee climbed above $90 per dollar on Monday but believes it could drop to $149, said Lugovsky. It's like an empire in the middle of power now. There will be serious events. The United States and 4 other countries imposed sanctions on Russia in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine on February 17. February 24, 2022. The scope and severity of the sanctions are unprecedented for Russia's large economy. Initial sanctions include freezing Russia's assets abroad and banning the export of key technologies to Russia. In 2022, sanctions will increase as the EU finally steps into a significant reduction in Russian oil and gas purchases. Separately, more than 1,200 Western companies closed their operations in Russia. It's been a year since the war. Is there a penalty? Initial setback but rapid recovery. Before the invasion, the West hoped that the threat of sanctions would deter Russia from attacking Ukraine. But as the invasion began, the focus shifted to curbing President Vladimir Putin's ability to finance the machine and encouraging him to back down. Western commentators initially believed that the sanctions were working. The Russian ruble fell in the first week of the war because most Russian banks were excluded from the SWIFT international market, the government's investment in foreign banks was frozen, and the Russian people were frightened. However, the Russian central bank was able to quickly control the exchange rate, bringing it back to pre-war levels. Inflation peaked at 18% in April before falling back to 12% in December. Even then, some Western observers said the sanctions were causing the Russian economy to decline. Decision caused serious damage to some sectors, especially aviation and manufacturing, where production fell by 80% due to the lack of imported goods. But Russia's total GDP will shrink by only 3% in 2022. Retail sales fell 9% this year as local brands and some Chinese and Turkish companies outpaced Western companies in the domestic market. Despite the sanctions and the easing of conflict, Putin does not appear to be impressed. In September, he took 300,000 hostages in a campaign to disrupt Ukraine's energy infrastructure with rockets and drone attacks. I have studied the economy of the Soviet Union and Russia for 40 years. I think there are 4 reasons why the sky isn't falling for the Russian economy. Russia's energy lifeblood. Russia will spend more than $300 million a day on warfare, but will earn $800 million a day from energy exports for most of 2022. This income is enough to prevent the decline in living standards and to replenish Russia's stock of weapons and ammunition. The war, along with Russia, caused oil and gas prices to skyrocket to cut oil supplies to Europe in 2021. International oil prices rose 50% in the first month of the war to peak at $139 per barrel in April, while oil prices in the European market rose 500% to peak at €300, $320 per megawatt hour. This brings huge benefits for Russia. Despite falling oil and gas exports to Europe in 2022, Russia's energy revenue reached $168 billion for the full year, the highest since 2011. It was reported that Russia's account reached $227 billion at the end of the year. 2. Russia has many customers. Second, 49 countries are sanctioned for only 60% of world trade. This shows that 40% are still willing to do business with Moscow. Most non-Western countries refuse to participate in the sanctions. Many see the war in Ukraine as the result of a major power struggle and do not blame Russia. India and China are buying more oil and gas from Russia, although they persuaded Russia to offer a discount of $20 to $30 per barrel. Turkey is also an important partner. In 2022, its trade with Russia will increase by 45%. Despite the efforts of European countries to reduce purchases from Russia, European countries have purchased $125 billion of oil and natural gas from Russia since the start of the invasion. India provided $18 billion. 3. The Russian economy is a war survey. Third, the Doomsday Survey does not appreciate the uniqueness of the Russian economy. The Russian government has been planning and preparing for this war for many years, and after the annexation of Crimea in 2014, it learned how to live with and survive sanctions. To extremes, such as high inflation that pushes many people to save money, or driving companies to murder and tax officials who steal from their businesses. Many people assume the worst and prepare for it. In general, they can withstand competition and accept low expectations. Russian labor market shocks usually absorbed not by laying off workers but by lowering wages until conditions improve. In addition, 15% of the workforce is made up of immigrants, most of whom are from Central Asia, who can be fired and sent home, and then again working as expected. 4. Oligarchs and policymakers stick around. One of the main political aspects of the first sanctions strategy is flawed. The theory is that sanctioned oligarchs, who will lose tens of billions of dollars and lose access to Western luxury, will persuade Putin to change course to save their fortunes. I think Russia is a dictatorship, not a kleptocracy, and Putin values state power more than personal wealth. The oligarchs lost half or more of their debts, but few criticized the war. They know that defying Putin means losing business, at least in Russia. Meanwhile, the liberal economists who run the central bank and finance ministry, which play an important role in the defense against Russia, remain loyal. As the Financial Times noted, Putin's technocrats saved the economy to fight their wars. Some observers hope that the sanctions will spark resistance from the Russian people. But that didn't happen. Protests were held but suppressed by riot police, with more than 19,500 arrested and some leaders sentenced to 8 years in prison. The aim of those who oppose the war is to leave the country. About 500,000 people left, including many skilled workers, a move that will hurt Russia's economic growth. Signs of economic weakness. As the war enters its second year, there is reason to believe this will change. It is worth noting that the Russian government has stopped most of its trade papers, so all information should be approached with caution. The truth.